Voice Teacher Podcast.
Welcome back to our part 2 of our interview with Kenneth Bozeman. If you haven't listened to part 1, go check out part 1. It's up. It's amazing. It's very interesting. And we'll jump in where we left off.
So very recently, I was interacting with a colleague of mine in Minneapolis at the PAVA convention, Bob Greider, who is a very fine speech-language pathologist in that area that works with a lot of singers. And I had met him years ago as I was struggling with my health issue. And he gave me some helpful hints even then about swallowing. And he works with articulation quite a bit to reorient the singers, our speakers, that has been having very positive effects for singers. So there were singers in that area that would send their teachers, that would send their singers to him to do these things to sort of help. So I'll share them, but I'm citing it's Bob Greider in Minneapolis. And he said, so I'll have you do some explorations. So if you do a regular N, like you would do an N, and of course my cold voice may won't work so well today. If you do a regular N, and notice where your tongue tip is. It's probably somewhere near where the teeth and the gums meet, somewhere in that area. Now take the tongue tip higher, and there's a little ripple on most people's gum ridge, a little bit higher. Put the tongue tip just above that ripple, like touching that ripple and above it, and do the end there. And your tongue will form a little bit of a spoon-like shape, a little cup. And it slightly internalizes the N sensation further back. Pulls in a little bit more of the deeper color of the sound. But very lax in the neck. Second one would be D's, any tongue tip articulator, like a D or a T. Normally we do that at that lower place, D, T. But if you do D, T, D, T, let it articulate there and then just release the tongue afterwards. D, T, T. You get, it's as opposed to D, T, D, T, D, T. You get a more relaxed, neutral larynx. L. So if you do an L, if you tell a student to do an L, they'll tend to think forward. Well, actually, put the tip up there above that little ripple and realize that the sound of an L actually doesn't come out the front. It comes out sort of the back sides. Relaxed neck. You got, again, a very relaxed neck. D, T, Lee. Just sort of playing with that and experiencing that more relaxed articulation of those consonants tends to reorient us more towards, I would say, more of the complementary vowel color.
Interesting. It reminds me a lot of something I've been working on recently, which is trying to change my resting tongue position, because I found that my default was to have the back of my tongue in an NG position and the front touching my bottom teeth just all the time. Switching it more to like touching that alveolar ridge, that's what it is, right? Yes. And keeping the entirety of my tongue glued to the top of my mouth. I noticed such a relief of tension in my shoulders and my neck just by making the change there. It's like as soon as that got kind of comfortable, I felt it in my jaw and then here and here, and it was so surprising. But it also reminds me of a student who had a frenectomy and then the next day said that they felt the similar kind of release.
Yeah. Well, Bob would have an explanation for that. First of all, he says when you swallow, try to notice where your tongue is when you swallow. And if you're swallowing with the best function, it's sucked up against the roof of your mouth in the front. If you swallow with your tongue tip down to your lower teeth, your tongue is working too hard for that swallow. And you form a kind of a suction when your tongue is at rest along the inside gum ridge of your upper teeth. And that suction, as the middle of the tongue relaxes from gravity. It again forms a little bit of a spoon-like shape that actually keeps all of these structures in what he refers to as an equipoise, sort of an easy poise, without there being droopy saggy. They're
Mhm.
at a nice released place. And that's kind of home base.
Mhm.
And he says the more we can stay close to home base, the freer the function will be, the better, the more efficient the function will be.
Which is so weird
So,
because switching from my core function resting place to this
yep.
one was one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had. And it was like all encompassing of my just my attention for a week or two before I could even focus on anything else. But I was just obsessed with like how weird it felt in front of my tongue as soon as I made that
Mm-hmm.
movement. It gave me a little bit more empathy, I think, for people who are making a massive change in their technique. It's like it can feel super, super weird, even if it's going to end up working well for you.
I again feel like that repositioning, if I'm just playing with that, internalizes the sound and warms it a little bit, but it's still clear.
Mm-hmm.
Goes more to the Oh, so do the M. Same if you do a normal M with a sort of a just lax tongue.
Mm.
And then, what did he suggest with the M?
Wasn't it pushing the tip of the tongue on the bottom?
That's what I suggested last
Mm.
time. That's from someone else. That's from Carrie Obert. So pushing the tongue tip a little bit into that divot behind your lower gums.
Mm.
You get a more focused auditory roughness, which is the buzziness. It's less breathy or diffuse. It's more clear and sharp. But it's also the vowel color along with it is fairly warm. Like that was some good pie. Basically, I say use affect. You use satisfying affect, self-soothing affects, self-soothing, self-reassuring, pleasurable affects will get you the most efficient phonation, whatever you're doing. Like, well, one go-to thing that we've talked about before is that I borrowed from another teacher is the "I want my mommy" affect. The toddler, I want my mommy, I want my mommy, I want my mommy. Completely takes me into a really light head registration that's very nice and internalized and migrates because I'm doing the affect and not worrying about the vowels, just saying the word. Let the affect dominate the diction rather than the diction dominating the affect, and it'll tend to set you up for the colors needed for that affect. And if the colors are right for whatever you're going for, technically, it'll just work way better than trying to micromanage where all your parts are.
Another one that I've used really, really frequently. uh, I'm curious what you think this one does. Is the "That's my Barbie"? Is it kind of the
Sure.
same?
Yeah. Yeah. You can be very exploratory with affects. And as long as you get a pleasurable sensation with them, it's gold. Then you're learning the feel. And that's both vocal learner, you're imitating models. This is how we explore sounds, by imitating sounds we hear
Mhm.
in models, whether it's a cartoon character or whatever. And as long as it feels pleasurable, however you're exploring it, it's safe.
That's a
It's
really lovely
kind of
maxim, is just if it feels good, if it feels pleasurable, it probably will sound good to other people, but it's really hard to remember when you're in the action of singing because it's like, "No, singing should feel so powerful and strong and
yeah,
blah." One thing that I
right.
found that's been helpful, which I think stems from thinking about the chiaroscuro whisper, because I started with tuning the E to the whisper to the B specifically, and then I was like, okay, some people can't really hear the specific pitch, but they can hear the quality of E. And if they just open their mouth and still hear the quality of E, that kind of works well. And then the next level of it was try just lip syncing. And if it feels weird when you're lip syncing, it's probably going to feel really weird when you actually start to sing. But yeah, it's been revolutionary for kind of helping people realize, oh, wait, I am adding a lot of extra musculature in my vowel shaping.
Yeah. The neck should feel really passive in the chiaroscuro whisper. It should be the most soothing way to whisper you can do, because it recruits the least articulation. So I use like warm-hearted affects. I mean, you can be really silly. I can use zombie affects. I'm a zombie, like I'm not moving anything. Or ventriloquist, can't see what I'm doing until you get to the little bit of lips in those. But it should feel very under-articulated in terms of neck awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And the sensation is more centered as opposed to more mouthy. It isn't way back. It's just sort of central. And the pitches I've got them all charted, and they seem to work. Those pitches seem to work for everybody if they're targeting those vowel timbres.
In the first book, you talk about body mapping and switching around awareness between that. And I see you kind of coming back to that frequently today. What are some of the most commonly bad places of awareness, false kinesthetics type things that you find that people notice? And why do you think we have that kind of false perception?
I don't know the answer to the why, but
Speculation.
the main one that I harp on a lot is the yawn. And yawn imagery has been used a lot in various pedagogies. And it was used because it does raise the palate and lower the larynx for like a classical sound, but it pulls the tongue back into the laryngopharynx. And so it gives you a false feeling of open throatedness. But in fact, your laryngopharynx is rather narrowed by that, which is easy to prove to yourself. When you inhale, the airspeed has to speed up wherever you're narrowed in order for the same volume of air to move through at the same rate, right? It's like a shallows in a river. The same amount of water's got to keep moving on by you. So wherever it's shallow, you get a lot of turbulence and white noise. White water and white noise are the same thing, really. So when you yawn and huff and puff through a yawn, you will feel coolness in the laryngopharyngeal area because that's where you're narrowed. So it's noisy and it cools there. Make it noiseless and cool in the front. I'm doing an eh. And that's actually much more relaxed and relatively open in the throat. Whatever vowel you're doing is going to affect how open the throat is because the tongue is moving around differently. So that's one. And so I do not use yawn imagery at all in my pedagogy. Mm-hmm. I know some teachers that are good teachers that do use it and manage it however they manage it. But yawn in the sound, to me, reduces the authenticity of the affect. Mm. So if everybody uses that as their imitation of an opera singer. Well, that's a bad imitation or an imitation of a bad opera singer, in my opinion. It's not the great chiaroscuro ringy timbres. It's the no, I'm, pretentious. Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, 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 yay. That's chiaroscuro, not yeah, yay. So actually, I feel like the sensation that I want in the laryngopharynx, actually the pharynx, the oropharynx. If you do a yawn, it feels like you've got a grapefruit in your oropharynx. That's the pharynx directly behind your mouth. I want instead the opposite of that. Like if you're doing an affect, like the hell yeah, damn right affect, it feels concentrated in the oropharynx. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't feel yeah, yeah, yeah. It's yeah. It isn't actually physically constricted, but it feels very together. So there's a false kinesthesia that I take advantage. Yeah, 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 yeah. That yeah, yeah. And it's collected and it actually shifts to above your palate and you go high enough with it. Oh,
Love
here's
it.
another one. A lot of people blame lateral mouth position for spread tone. They are correct that a spread tone usually is accompanied with a lateral mouth position.
Mm-hmm.
But the lateral mouth position isn't causing the spread tone. And they're assuming that's causing the spread tone. The Italians used to say, inhale through a smile, it opens the throat. And most classical teachers, for fear of that spread tone, have avoided that. So here I'm going to ask you to do a little experiment. Think of something really amusing that makes you smile, but be very internal with it, and ask yourself: Is my throat open or not? How is that? Am I doing yay, or am I doing yeah? Okay, that's really funny. It's actually a great chiaroscuro positioning. The lateral mouth is not bothering the depth of the timbre at all. It's totally a matter of realizing what's causing what and playing with it. So I can do a yay, 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 or I can sing Maria and not have to go Maria, thinking that I have to lip round the E or it'll go spread on that high note. No. Maria, Maria, Maria. I don't have to go. You don't have to do the Jonas Kaufman. I disagree with that approach. He's a wonderful artist, having a major, wonderful career, but we don't have to make those shapes to make chiaroscuro timbre up high.
Oh, I was going to ask you to talk more about the overvowel undervowel concept. You talked about that at the EFTOM conference last time. I don't know, maybe it was a couple years ago, 2019. Okay, and I found it very useful, but I'd like it just to know more about it.
Well, it's actually very actual, very literal. It is, to that extent, it's somewhat objective, except that our experience of it is subjective. You have resonances that your vocal tract features certain parts of the spectrum. You can put a noise, which a chiaroscuro is a whisper is a noise, which plays every frequency. It's just like white noise. But your vocal tract is choosing which parts of that spectrum to feature in the sound that gets broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Your lowest resonance creates your first formant. Your second resonance creates your second formant. Higher resonances create singer's formant cluster and so forth. So you're featuring different parts of the spectrum. The lowest resonance is featuring frequencies that land in the ooh, oh, maybe occasionally as high as an aw tone color range. So your undervowel, your lowest resonance for every vowel that you make is some kind of ooh, oh, aw, ooh. Your second resonance is featuring frequencies that land from aw up to e, I. So depending on what vowel you're doing, if you're doing an E, you're going to have an E-like resonance and an U-like resonance. But you'll perceive the complementary sound, which is not the sound you're going for in the word, as blended with the target sound if you're listening linguistically. So you'll hear E, and instead of hearing E and U, which you can learn to hear, if you learn to hear spectrally, you'll hear E and E, 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 and it's percentages of those. So you're playing with E, 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 E. You can play with them, and when you do the chiaroscuro whisper, you can learn what it feels like.
So do you feel the undervowel in the front of your mouth? Is that correct? And the
I
overvowel
feel it in the
kind of-
mouth.
Okay.
About here.
And the overvowel more in the pharynx, or?
And the overvowel in the pharynx, yes.
Okay.
Or I'm thinking it that way. I'm
Yeah.
willfully thinking it that way. Because if I go E and I put the E out there, I get a tight throat. E, E,
Okay.
E. So I'm putting the E to the front. E. In Georgia, they start with that. You dogging the May, A. Is that undervowel gliding into the E? Me. It isn't me. It's me.
Yeah.
If I only have overvowel, I'm going to have me, E, me, E, that has both colors. But you have to learn to attend to it mentally that way to notice.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll notice when you do it right, your vowels are much more centralized. E, A, E, A, ah, E, A, or like E, A, there's a lot more in that right? Yeah, yeah. So learning about the fact that that a vowel is made of two vowels and beginning to try to pay attention to it and feel and listen to the blend can lead you to making better shapes
The
that were
whisper, I think,
more
has been
comfortable.
really big for me to hear that second formant, but the first formant, hearing that quality has always kind of eluded me. This is really helpful thinking of just a kind of position in the front, which really explains why E for me in the higher register is just amazing, because you have
Yeah.
to have that kind of in the front, and you have to form it with the back of your tongue. Yeah.
And the other thing is, I like glottal onsets. I like coup de glottes, very gentle, clean glottal onsets. If you do a glottal onset poorly, you can injure your voice. So a lot of people will just say avoid them altogether. And depending on the skill of the singer, that's not bad advice. But if you know how to do it well, it can be very helpful because it gives you the most efficient acoustic result. If you do them poorly, your glottis is whacking together too hard and irritating the tissues. Onset the complementary vowel, onset the undervowel. So instead of going E, 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 I'm going to go E, 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 E. I'm onsetting the E, E, A. And then you feel it as if it's way down here instead of high in your neck. This high in your neck, it's constricted. E, 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 E. So I'm onsetting the E, E. If it's an ah, I'm going to onset the I'm not going to go ah, 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 ah. I make an ah shape, but I think onsetting the sound of an with affect. And again with warm-hearted, soothing, self-soothing affects. Ah, then I don't get a hard glottal onset. I just get a gentle, clean one. My argument for that is a voiceless lip burr. So if you do a voiceless lip burr, notice you start it with your lips closed. That's why they call it a burr. Starts with the B. It starts with a very gentle closed glottis, closed lips. This is like the glottis. Try doing it with air first. It's much less efficient. Takes you much longer to get to an efficient vibration. Now, you're not squeezing your lips. They're very comfortably, gently closed. That's what we want. E, E, A, instead of E, A, Now, a coordinated onset, which is the attempt to start them at the same time, is still a very healthy onset. That's what we taught for years in voice. But the coup de glotte is actually better. E, and if you do expression, you're doing a coup de glotte. Do that. You feel those clean, gentle onsets? If they're pleasurable and self-soothing, they're efficient and they're not going to stress your voice. Even if you're doing a try that one.
You got to wave your finger with it.
Oh,
There
and
we
by
go.
the way, gesturing, do it. We're also learning why gesturing from, again, Heidi Moss and others. The part of the brain that motivates voicing is I say in bed with the part that motivates gestures. I'm working with an Indian singer from India that's doing, and as they sing, they're doing all kinds of these motions. This is fantastic. You say move. because they're both motivated by expression, and inhibiting the movement can inhibit the voicing. But allowing yourself to move can free the voicing. You can learn to do the voicing without the movement freely, but while you're learning, why not? I don't know. Instead of just trying to make your voice move around while you're holding still. Why do we do things like, oh, yeah, yeah. Let those movements happen. I think you'll find that your voice is going to work better for allowing that spontaneous expression motivated but still pleasurable movement.
Have you ever used like Chekhov's psychological gestures, the crush and the lift and the push, any of those?
I haven't. I'm too ignorant of that. I should learn about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an acting thing, but it forces you to do these big gestures and then see whatever kind of emotions come up with it, and then
come out of that.
Just whichever feels the most right, you kind of run with. Well, thank you so much. I mean, we could obviously keep talking about this forever, but I'm always blown away whenever I see you present or anything. You just make me feel so invigorated. Your love for the voice and continuing to kind of keep trying to get better. I think that's a wonderful model, and we're just so lucky to have you in the community.
Well, thank you. Obviously, the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, it was fascinating. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, that was incredible. I don't have anything to add. I'm just like processing all that you said and going, wow, how am I going to use this?
Jeez, just
wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. I'm still stuck on what you said 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, it is so wonderful to feel like you don't know anything. Okay,
good. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, every time that that he gets like really into some of this stuff, I've started understanding more and more every time that I listen or read something by him. It's like I have this scaffolding of like, okay, I kind of know why this works, but going into these really in-depth things starts building on that scaffolding, even though like for him, maybe he has this full mansion already and I just have this little hovel shack. But it's
man, if yours is a hovel shack, I'm embarrassed right now.
No, I mean, it's just wonderful because it makes me feel like it's not unreasonable to get that kind of knowledge if you just keep coming back to this kind of stuff.
It's keep wonderful. Learning. Yeah, I love that he has spent his whole life figuring it out and going in depth and not giving up. Well, like we were talking about a few episodes ago, how the best teachers are the ones that keep learning, the ones that don't think they have arrived and know it all, because nobody does. No one person does. Even Ken, he's still learning, and I think that's fabulous.
It's amazing. It just always makes me so excited to go teach and to play around with things because, I mean, teaching is wonderful. It's a great job, but there is an element of it that is just repetition, right? It's very repetitive. And I love that. Honestly, I love drills. I love exercises and just doing it over and over and subtly making changes until you get really good at one thing that seems super basic. But within that, there also comes this element of monotony sometimes. And whenever I am exposed to these kind of ideas and just see these role models who are still really passionate, it makes me feel like, oh yeah, no, this is why I'm doing it. And what can I think about while I'm doing some of the stuff that can get more monotonous to keep it interesting for me and then better experience for the student.
Right. And really understanding what you're hearing. Like if it's boring to you, then you've stopped listening, really, you know, like when you have those moments, and I know it happens to me, I'm like, okay, let's do this again, you know, but then it's like, wait a minute, I need to listen more in depth, or like you said, what am I thinking about when this is happening in a student's voice or things like that. Yeah. So fascinating.
A theme that I've seen with Ken, with our conversations over the last few years, and I'm just so lucky that he's given me that kind of time, but he always comes back to the affect, which is just fascinating because it's just like a nerdy guy. When I see his book, it's the acoustic information that's really just stands out. I'm like, oh, this is just fascinating. How can I use this? It's so tempting to try to explain that to every student I see. And for some people, I do think scratching that itch is really helpful so that they can surrender and be like, oh, I understand why this works. Now I don't have to pay attention to it. But the affect keeps coming up. Definitely need to keep playing with that myself.
Well, and it's kind of the idea, like I had a director tell me one time, I was pretty young and I just barely started teaching, and I was really like focused on technique, and I was in the show, and I was worried about like doing it right and like all the things. And he said to me, he's like, Amy, nobody cares. And I was like, how dare they? Like, of course, technique is the most important thing in the world. How could they not care how I'm getting this high B flat or whatever it was, you know? And he's like, nobody cares how you get there. Just get there. I'm like, rude. But then I went back and I've used that so many times with my students. And like, guess what? You don't study technique to impress your audience with your technique. Like, they could care less. They care about the story. They care about, you know, what you make them feel. And I think Ken is so good at like basically doing that for voice teachers. Like, yes, all that is great, but your students do not care. They're your audience. And they could care less about how you got there, but that affect does it for them. And if they want to know, they can ask. But
big example of that is the other week I did a reaction video to a singer who I thought like connects to their audience quite well. Their audience is very, very passionate in a very scary way to me. But I also believed that how the singer was approaching certain parts of their voice was not very sustainable, and that you'd have to make this sort of shift if you're going to keep going higher. And it's backed up by it. But as soon as I kind of pointed that out, they're all just like, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. And to give them benefit of the doubt, I'm listening for a totally different thing. Like, they are hearing, yes, I feel this kind of, I feel when I listen to this person sing. And almost everyone will care about that way more than if this person is approaching in the yell version, in the yell kind of timbre, or in the closed timbre. It's exactly what Ken was talking about. And I just have an aesthetic preference of approaching soprano mid voice with more of that closed kind of sound. But a lot of people just love that more open one. Like, that's why I think Christina Aguilera is so popular, because it makes people feel things. And like Ken was saying, yell is a very emotional tool. And if we have to kind of have it in our toolbox, but just know why we're using it and the dangers of it. And I guess I just get kind of freaked out when that seems to be someone's only approach to it.
Yeah. Well, because like you said, it's not sustainable. And, you know, then you're sending them to therapy, and, you know, it's like it's a whole other round of problems. Then you get Terry involved and you're like, Terry, come and help us.
Yeah. But
you know,
it's so easy to start thinking like singing is this gradable exercise that you are a better singer because your technique is better than this other person. When if the other person's connecting better, they're the better singer in that moment. And we can still work on some other things technically, but we got to keep remembering the whole point of why we got into this. Like, we didn't start singing all the time as children because we're obsessed with the technique. It's because it made us feel. And the more that as adults we can kind of remember what that felt like, I think it can bring a lot more joy into this whole experience.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IFTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IFTOM at iftom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast.